Welcome to Jimmy's Jobs. This episode sees us go to one of the UK's most ambitious art projects, Sea Monster, based down in Weston-Super-Mare near Bristol. This is a gas platform, or perhaps more commonly known as an oil rig, repurposed into an interactive environment to explore and inspire conversations around climate change and renewable energy. We caught up with the artistic director of this project, Patrick O'Mahony, and record this episode in their custom-built podcast studio overlooking the Sea Monster project itself. I first came across Patrick when his drone show appeared over Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Jubilee, and thought, now that is a job of the future, I have to interview him. This episode is the first one on the show with someone from the creative industries, so we talked through Patrick's story and how he came to lead his 50-person team in Leeds. We talk about how he started out at university, what it was like working at Buckingham Palace, as well as how the art and event industries have changed over the past decade. Look out next week for episode 2 of the interview, where we do a deep dive into the Sea Monster project itself. Patrick, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
How do you describe what you do?
It's a good question. So, I describe myself, I suppose, as a creative director. We design across entertainment, ceremonies, pavilions, festivals. It's a really unusual place that we kind of exist in terms of that, high concept and also design and delivery as well. So it's my worst nightmare, the question at a dinner party, because I'm still, after 20 years of doing it, trying to refine it down. Sometimes I'm talking about drones, sometimes I'm talking about oil rigs. I never quite know where to pitch it some of the time.
So we first encountered each other with the show that you did for the Jubilee, right? And the corgis above the palace, which was swarm drones, which I at times thought, there is not a more clearer definition of a job of the future than being an operator for this.
Drones.
So I found out who you were, and we messaged on LinkedIn, etc. Is that the coolest project you've worked on?
It's definitely one of the coolest. Well, I suppose to have that opportunity and that privilege, I suppose, to fly at the palace, above the palace. My mum, I think, finally realised what I did after 20 years and was proud to actually talk about it rather than having a proper job. So I think the thing was that it was a real moment in time for us. We'd been doing the drones for probably 4 or 5 years by that point, flown all over the world with that side of the business. But I think the palace just has that moment where it brought everyone together. A little smiling dog above the Queen's house just captured everyone's imagination and I suppose showed what was possible within that space.
And what's the pressure like in that situation, because it's not something that you can practice for above the palace, right?
I think that's you can sure feel you're alive when you're doing that. So what we did on the palace for the first time as well was rehearse it off site. So we didn't want to fly the show above the palace before the night. We didn't want to give the game away with the drones. You're flying 150 meters wide, 200 meters high, so you can't hide. You definitely can't hide in central London above the palace. So we practiced it off-site at a farm in Yorkshire first. So we have a farm up there where we can do off-site testing where no one sees. But we're still then going to the palace, flying the show for the first night live, having never flown the show in that situation before. So the first time everyone sees it on national broadcast is the first time we see it as well. So, and it's all done live. We're calling it live. All the comms are done from where I was in front of house, in front of the palace, back to the takeoff pad. So it's all done in live and real time. So you can feel your heart beating outside of your chest, is how I describe it.
Can you enjoy it in that scenario?
You can't enjoy it in that moment. So what I always find when we do the big lives, would be that New Year's Eve we also did, be the palace, is you almost can't remember it until afterwards. So in the live moment, you are so transfixed on watching all the computers, all the countdown clocks, listening to the broadcast truck, that it almost doesn't happen. So when it actually flies the whole moment, you don't hear the crowd, you don't see it. All you're thinking is looking at all the feedback screens, listening to all the comms with the crew, thinking, is it all going to be okay? Yes, we've lit up on time. Yes, all the drones are there. Are they going back home okay? Only afterwards do you kind of go, that was amazing. And you watch it back on the broadcast after and you go, oh, right, yeah, it did look great. But weirdly, it just almost blacks out during the live sequence.
Kind of in the zone. How many drones were involved with that?
We had 400 at the palace. We've got a fleet of 2,500. So a small proportion, but we're confined there by what we can fly in terms of the airspace around us. So, and with that show is a really classic example. Everyone was like, let's fly the biggest show in London ever, which we couldn't do just because of the material space that we had around the palace. But I think weirdly, it's still the show that we've had the most coverage on. I think it speaks to then how you design, what you design with. We had free reign over how to design that show, and we knew what would work well. We knew what would capture people's imagination, and a small dog later, I think we managed that.
And how does something like that come about? Because the palace, probably the most traditional institution in the country. How does that conversation sort of how does it initiate, but then B, how does it go when you're sort of brainstorming the ideas?
Yeah, so we were contacted by BBC, I think in the Christmas before the Jubilee, to see if we'd be interested in looking at. We'd just done New Year's Eve, or we're just about to do New Year's Eve for the second time, which I think had paved the way, I suppose, in terms of what was possible and that ambition piece. They came to us and said we would like to pitch for it, we would like to put some ideas together, which we did. And I suppose we were inherently playful from the beginning. We wanted to make sure it had a bit of sense of humour to it, as well as paying reference to the Queen and that whole 70-year piece. So, and it starts very traditionally in terms of how we do it. We start with sketches, papers, and we've got very high tech on one side, but then the design process starts on a very normal level, sketching out the ideas, a bit of Photoshop to visualize it, and then we're into 3D animations and move forward from there. But we had a really, I suppose, open dialogue with the BBC and with the Palace to say, we would like to push the boundaries in terms of how we match with projection and audio and audience. So we have that layered shot in terms of the profile of the piece, which they were really up for. They wanted to do the projection as well. So I suppose trying to make sure it all works as one. Often the drone shows can be just isolated in the sky as a moment up there, whereas when you have it all coming together with the lights and the projection and all working as one piece, it's far more cohesive as an installation or as a work.
And so how did you get involved with all this? Where is the story for how does it begin? Because it's not being an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor. No,
it's not. That would have been the safer, more stressless period. So we were started I was at university in Durham, misguidedly doing economics, which worked on one level but didn't on others. And within my first week at university, I started running club nights. So my original business partner, Matt, he was a DJ. And I started designing sets, and we thought we could revolutionise the clubbing world of Durham University while we're there. So we started running a Wednesday night and a Friday night in our first year. And I suppose that got bigger and bigger whilst we were there, and we started to build an identity, and then we started booking bands for colleges. And I suppose we got a taste for what was possible, doing a lot less work and a lot more promoting and working within that scene. But I suppose it taught us all the foundations of what we wanted to do. So came out of university thinking this was like the kind of hills were paved with gold after doing, multiple nights for multiple years, and thought it would all be easy. But then started to promote and set up the business straight out. I think 2004 was when we set up, so 18 plus years ago. And I think for the first 10 years out of that, we almost didn't know who we were, what we were. We were doing anything in that space, working a lot with European street theatre troupes to design big crane structures, worked in Macau for 6 months in terms of their entertainment over there. But just really, we knew we wanted to do this, but we didn't know what that looked like. We were promoting concerts one day, we were designing sets another day. There was no definition to how we worked. And I think that's what we soon realized, we struggled to get work because no one knew what we were. One day we could be concert promoters, one day we could be, running a photo shoot over here. So it was this disparate kind of approach, and it was, like feeding a dinosaur. Some years would be great, some years would be awful, and you kind of rode it along for a long time. And then we start, I suppose, to kind of get serious about it. We were getting a bit older, and we started to refine it down into ceremonies work, big festival work, designing one-off structures. So we got rid of all the concert work, we got rid of all the corporate event work, and started to focus in on just big moments, basically, and broke into global ceremonies then, and started to really solidify our identity in that space. We set up a fabrication workshop as well, so we could build all our own work. And that's
what's a fabrication workshop?
So that's where I suppose everything we design, we make. So it's a workshop for steel workshop, wood workshop, fiberglass. So everything that we generally design, we had greater control. So we're always designing unusual structures, and people generally then didn't want to make them or would charge us huge prices. So we started to then go, well, let's make our own, because we can control that supply chain from front to back, and we know the quality of our work is what we want. So, a real roller coaster, I think, till 2010. And then 2010, 2011, we broke into international ceremonies, and then it started to stabilize, and the studio got bigger and bigger and bigger.
And we'll come back to international festivals, but just before that, touching on the student time, because I think, in the early noughties, it's pretty rare for students to kind of be entrepreneurial as much. Whereas now, when I go to university campuses, partly I actually think it's a side effect of bringing in fees, is that people are there and they want to kind of make money, because actually they sort of realise they have quite a lot of time when they're students as well to sort of do that. What's your kind of top tip in that scenario for students wanting to make money or be entrepreneurial on the side while studying?
Yeah, I think it's the best time. Like, in hindsight now, looking back, I was lucky to almost stumble into it. I did it because I wanted to experiment in that space in terms of music and promotion and everything else. But it's such a great incubator almost in that space, because you're already there, you're already on a job in that sense, you're studying, but like you say, you have that free time, so you're insulated from the outside world. You've got a marketplace which is already there with an audience which wants to buy from you, listen to you. You've got a network. We had no social media, obviously. That's how old I am. So, we were communicating through flyers and posters and everything else, but you have a perfect captive audience, and you're not risk-free, but you're relatively risk-free compared to, a wife and 3 kids later, when, the deck's stacked against you in terms of that side of it. So it's the perfect chance to test stuff, experiment with stuff, and you've got a very friendly, very safe environment to do that within. So, but I think it's also key, we did it as a function of enjoying. We didn't set out thinking that would be our business and I'll still be doing it 20 years later. We set about it because it was something to do. It had a core interest in what we were doing in terms of music and design. So it was the business was almost like a side effect of what we started to do, because it was pure interest and pure drive to explore it.
And what was the kind of breakout moment then around 2010, 2011? What was the moment you sort of, you became more globally recognised?
Yeah, so the Middle East was great for us. So as Dubai started to really move, ceremonies started to explode over there in terms of or big shows with them, big ambition. We did, what was the Dubai World Cup out there in, I want to say like 2010, I think it was. Where we designed like this huge falcon which was hung off a helicopter, and we flew it over Elton John, and we had we had thousands of horses, and we had these huge inflatables. And I suppose then we designed something crazy, showed it to someone out there, and they went, yes, absolutely, how much for that? And we're like, oh, okay, right, I see. So the ambition out there matched our ambition in terms of design and in terms of our ability to deliver. So I think at that point when we realized, I suppose, the world was a lot bigger than where we were operating just in the UK, that's when it really changed. And all of a sudden our entire business flipped from being originally based in the UK to now, outside of structures like this that we're so in front of today, 90% of our work is international. And that was a big mindset changer in terms of, right, the world is very big. The demand globally for moments and design is huge. The UK has a great reputation in terms of design and entertainment. Let's export that as part of our identity. And it really, really kind of cycled from there.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is like, you are a modern day exporter, right? Like, it's pretty
absolutely
incredible in that sense. We often think about exports so often as physical goods and so on. But it's an amazing story. 90% based outside. What have been some of the highlight projects that you've worked on from a purely creative mindset? What have been some of the highlights? Yeah,
the big ceremonies have been great, but I still have a strong music. Going to festivals was a big driver for us when we're younger in terms of who we are, what we are, like what we loved. And when we were commissioned in 2018 to be one of the 5 artists at Coachella Festival in California. So we're now one of their only resident artists there. Wow. So we designed their biggest art piece ever that they'd had there, first art piece that people could go inside of. It's a big, almost like rainbow tower that sits there on the site. And seeing how well that did for a festival socially as well, it went across all their channels. It still socially outperforms everything that they have there. To do that and have that recognition then in the States, and seeing a project go from literally designed when we're on the polo fields out there, was amazing. And still, you know, we get to go back every year. We're talking about new structures with them now, you know, to see that journey. And also, like, internationally, we get a lot of respect for that piece because it's in that music scene. It's on that pedestal of what Coachella is and everything else. That was a really, you know, it's a great project for us.
And what changes have you seen in the kind of design event space over the last 20 years? Because it is one of the examples I point to of that kind of modern economy. So it didn't really exist 20 years ago, was the sort of plethora of events that are available now, partly a lot easier to organise through social media and technology more broadly. But also the design element sort of intrigues me a lot, because it's become a lot easier to sort of, he says, it's become a lot easier. You may have different views on this stuff, but I suppose it's become more creative. That's what sort of, I find so inspiring. But yeah, what are the changes that you've seen?
I think there's quite a lot in terms of how we go about it. So I think the awareness of it as a space, when we first started out in 2004, you know, I suppose we were making it up as we went along. We were forcing the conversation with people about design, about large scale events. I suppose we were having to almost create our own market. You know, the business that we have now as New Substance didn't exist in any format, which is why we made it up basically to fulfill a desire of what we wanted to do. You know, I think ceremonies like when London 2012 came through so strong as an Olympic city, and what we did in that ceremony there was hugely powerful, and again opened people's eyes to what was possible in terms of that space.
Did you have involvement with
we were sadly outside of the country on another show. I wish we had an opportunity to be part of it, but we were already on something else at that point. But at the same time, it brought so many eyeballs to the UK again as like an entertainment scene. And amplified that ceremony moment. The ceremonies continue with World Cup only a few months away, which we're on, and the Olympics around the corner in Paris. You know, all those conversations are cyclical. But I think social media, whilst we didn't have it to start with, has also massively changed. We've seen it now in terms of festivals and cities and big art installations like this. You know, social is such a big driver, but it drives now our design industry as well. So you need to make sure when you design, it's perfect for capture, it's going to work well, but it's also it's a really double-edged sword for me in that sense that people come to us with design briefs that say it has to be captured really well. So are you designing for Instagram or for social? Are you designing for the art of what's intended behind it? So I have this kind of two views on it, because I hate obviously that being the driver. The artwork to be ultimately formed by allowing somebody to take a photograph of it and share it, because that gets more views. But on the flip side to that, people now are investing in large scale installations or large scale moments, which they wouldn't have done before, because they know it can amplify their brand or their city or their moment. So the work wasn't there before. So it's great, that opportunity that more artists are getting, like ourselves, to create those moments. But at the same time, it feels slightly less wholesome, I suppose, in terms of artistic endeavor, because the social or the exposure is driving the art at the same time.
Yeah. And do you consider yourself an artist?
We sit in that space, so we're commercialized artists in that sense. Yes, okay. I would love to just do pure installation pieces, but we wear that hat in terms of where we are. We want to, we're very lucky. We employ, over 40 people in terms of studio and workshop. We have a drone business, which is in 3 countries now as well. So we have to, ultimately, we're responding to a brief a lot of the time, and we are paid creators. And I think that's okay. The art scene is often quite highbrow in that sense, and it's, you're accused of selling out and things like that, which we have done in the past. But, we want to exist within that art and entertainment space, and we need to make money from that process. It's always, for some reason, in arts and culture, you're not allowed to make any money in that process. It's always, you have to do it for the art. But I think to be commercialized creators, there's nothing wrong with that. And especially if we're trying to build an industry where we want more talent to come into it, we have to attract that talent. You have to live, and you have to live well at the same time. So I think embracing the fact of commercial creators is no bad thing, but it's often not spoken about.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting, the kind of creative space in that sense, because I really disliked art and was terrible at it at school. And I would never have thought of myself kind of as a creative. Even in the second episode of this podcast, I said I'm not a creative, and actually Pip Jameson sort of hit back and said, well, you are, because you kind of created this podcast. And only now, sort of 2 years on, do I think, well, yeah, I suppose it is. And it has been a bit of a battle to kind of commercialize it and work that stuff out. But it's, I think it's one of these things where again, partly because of social media as well, it's become so much easier to create things
Absolutely.
and promote them as well. Like like you say, it's a double-edged sword on that. I mean, you clearly probably didn't think of yourself as a creative if you studied economics.
No, I was misguided, I think, at that point. But the original plan was to go and do art at university. And then I think there was like a slight crisis of confidence and probably some parental influence along the way. He went, I think you should go over there and do economics. That's far much more stable approach. And but, at the same time, it allowed me to experiment in terms of what we ended up doing. It was a great grounding on one level, allowed me then to properly dive into all the creative side of everything I enjoyed or what I wanted to do. And I had that platform, do you know what I mean? It was a series of lucky events in terms of finding Matt, who's my original business partner, the club nights that we did, the environment we were in Durham in terms of like a college system where we had a very closed market in terms of who to market to, and it kind of went forward from there.
What more can we do to encourage people to go into creative and artistic endeavours? I think
for me, it's about awareness. So I didn't know the arts when I was going through school. Careers advice was very stilted. In fact, there wasn't any careers advice. Let's be honest. It was go to university, get a job. Yeah. I suppose for me, it's about that awareness. I think things like the podcast, doing things exactly like this, and encouraging. We've done a huge schools program here, encouraging people to get in contact with you. I suppose it's breaking down the barriers of what a business looks like. People think that you have to apply to a job advert. There has to be a job there to go to. Whereas I think one member of staff, every single member of our staff is somebody that has either done work experience with us, done a grad placement with us, has worked with us as a member of crew, has hustled us and repeatedly written to us to kind of go, I need to come and talk to you. And I think it's that level of ambition and drive, which is more important than anything else. We've never then looked at CVs or what they've done. It's more about those individual qualities. And I think people have to be aware that, finding good people is really, really hard. So if those good people come to you and beat down the door, and somebody, even if they're going to beat down the door, you already know they've got a baseline, interest because they're the ones who are coming to you. And it makes our life so much easier. So like the biggest advice we always have for people is literally contact us. If you want to talk to us, the more you can speak to us, the more we can get to know you. We've had loads of people on this show here, new people that we're now going to carry on working with, because the easiest thing you can do is if you get to know somebody, you like somebody, the rest of it's quite easy from there.
Yeah. And so talk us, because you've got one of the other things when I kind of read the story in the Daily Mail originally that I loved about it was the fact you employ 50 people now, based in Leeds as well.
Yeah.
Like some of these stories don't necessarily get the national kind of prominence they deserve. But talk to us about those 50 people. Yeah, what are the jobs within New Substance?
Yeah, so all creative. And I think that's it. Like our engineers have the same thing. At one point they were said, well, you're the creative department, we're the engineering department. And, but then you need creative engineers, you need creative, everyone has to be creative to do what we do, because we're not following a traditional path in terms of what we're doing. So in terms of who we have in the studio side of things, we obviously have our kind of core creative in terms of, the ideas, in terms of where it comes from, kind of creative directors like myself, associates who drive the ideas part of the design process. We then have visualizers who are amazing, who can take, a terrible sketch from me or from Ollie or anyone else and sit there and listen to us, and then somehow extract what's in our heads onto a piece of paper, into a visualization, into a 3D model, which is like an incredible step to go through when you look at how bad some of my direction has been over the years in terms of, I want it to look like this and hope they can understand. But we have a great team who then do that visualization point, and at that point it really kind of widens out. Once people have got something to look at and to dissect, we then have engineers from the workshop who kind of start to have arguments with us about gravity and how things stand up and how big and how small, or and then we have project managers, production managers who then start to put the flesh around the bones of like, how much is it going to cost, how are we going to deliver it in the time, what's the loading time? What do we do about freight? So it kind of goes from, a small group in terms of the idea, and then it kind of layers up then from there on in terms of how we make it, how we afford it, how we deliver it. So it kind of ramps up, and then you then got the workshop then around us over here, which has got anything from, steel fabricators to software engineers to scenic artists to carpenters who then start to get the visibility even at that stage of, well, we could do this or we could do that. So it's kind of fans out basically like that.
Yeah, and I'm just laughing because I know that Leo will be smiling, the producer, because I once, when we were doing our first live event, so I was like, we were talking about doing some posters that we were going to have in places, but also we were going to use online as well. And I was just like, I just wanted to look like a movie poster. And that's basically
that's level of my brief sometimes. Yeah, yeah, so, exactly that.
What is the what's the bit before the funnel with that? Like, so it's interesting to talk about it sort of broadening out, but like, when sort of like the Paris Olympics approaches you or something. I mean, now you're a bit more established and whatever. But when that was happening in the early days, I mean, can you almost sort of believe it? Is there any bit of imposter syndrome with that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. So, in the early days, we were bashing on doors, basically, just to kind of, and it's that resilience, because the other thing with entertainment and arts as well is no one wants to take a risk on you. So you have that awful situation to start with where you have all the ambition, but you don't have the creds. So you can't get in because no one will give you a chance. So, but then you can't build the creds without somebody giving you a chance. And it's finding that way in, like we did in the Middle East and on other big shows where we got those firms moments, created the creds and got through. But even now when we always keep going up another notch in terms of scale and ambition, and you always need to keep proving you're only as good as your last show in that sense.
Yeah.
So it still requires, I mean, most of our work's referral based now. So and we've been in those different networks for long enough. You just you move on to the next one and you're referred in, but we still have our own set of ambitions in terms of where we want to go and in terms of what's next for us, where you have to keep finding your way in and finding where the funders are for that, or finding how we go about it. So we have an established business which runs year in, year out, which is great, and that pays for all those people. But we have then new ambitions in terms of what Sky Magic's doing, in terms of what New Substance is doing, in terms of where we'd like to go, in terms of resident shows now and having our own IPs in the entertainment space. So it's constantly evolving, and you always think, oh, when I get to that, once I've done that huge show, I'll feel content and I feel like we've got there. But I still have that mentality sometimes. I was joking about the other day, like, of being in my parents' bedroom, basically at a desk, hustling away, trying to pretend we're bigger than we were. And sometimes you lose sight of the fact that you've got like members of staff now and it's much bigger and everything else, because you still have that mentality that it could all disappear in a heartbeat. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, I suppose that still drives me forward, and that hunger to keep going still burns very hard even today.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. It reminds me of when we first got the Octopus Group to kind of come on and support the show properly, because it was like it was like, okay, well, we've got something with this now, and it's really tough in those kind of early days when you're kind of working it all out. But that is just the nature of entrepreneurship, isn't it?
And you never take the time to reflect on it either. That's it. Only when you do stuff like this and actually talk to other people, or people come to you and say, "Could we interview you about this?" And you kind of go, "Oh right, okay, yes, I suppose we did do." It's like with the Palace in that sense. I remember when we did that show, and it came down, and we were like, "Oh, that was good. It went well," and everyone was pleased, and the buzz of the show was massive, and went for a few beers. It was only then the next day when we got a wave of international press and requests for interviews, and people like you reaching out, you kind of go, "Oh right, okay, yeah, that was a big deal, wasn't it?"
Yeah,
because you're always looking for the next show, or you've got the mechanics of running the business as well, which is always pulling your mind, and then you've got a family as well back somewhere in Leeds to look after as well. So very rarely, I suppose, you take that moment to kind of go, oh right, okay, well, we've made it work for 18 years now, and it does employ quite a few people, and it is quite something to be proud of. You never get that chance to reflect a lot of the time.
100%. And what are the best things about Leeds as a enterprise hub?
Yeah, so
not the football team, obviously.
Well, hey, come on. It's a hard life being a Leeds fan. Starts so well every year and goes rapidly downhill by Christmas. So, aside from the football team, I suppose we have the space there that we wouldn't have in a lot of cities. So we have a big studio there, we have a big workshop, which we wouldn't have been able to do in lots of other major cities. I suppose we've grown up with it as well, so it's part of our identity in terms of who we are. We're now seeing, I suppose we've lived through the times where we were probably one of the only arts entities or entertainment entities there, whereas now Channel 4's up there now. There's quite a pace to the city again. We're retaining a lot of talent who want to stay in the city from the universities. So it feels like now is a really great time in the city. There's a big cultural moment of Leeds 2023 next year, where we've got an entire year of culture. Bradford's just won 2025, which is up the road. So it feels like there is a real kind of moment up there. There's a lot of really great talent up there, which we're managing to keep.
Yeah.
With it, we have grad programs that we take from, we always retain from them as well. So, it's been our home, I suppose. It's been part of our identity in terms of who we are. We have the space in terms of, off-site testing. We have a farm up there which we can go and test ridiculous things on, and we don't have any press snooping around to see what we're doing. So when you're rehearsing the Queen's Jubilee, you don't see it in the paper the next day. So it's given us that platform, I suppose, to expand very quickly, to have the finance to operate up there, and then to move internationally, straight out of Manchester into the rest of the world. So it's just part of who we are and what we love about it.
And what does the future look like? What's the dream project that you were kind of talking about? Like, you're always trying to be more ambitious. You're always trying to, notch up the scales and the dials and so on. What's the sort of...
I mean, Olympic Games are always a big kind of North Star. Paris is around the corner. Lots of interesting conversations with them now. We are gearing up to go for the Japan Expo as well. So Japan Expo 2025, in terms of the big pavilions that are there. That's been on our in our sites for a while. We're developing our own immersive theatre concept as well, which will hopefully go into the States in 2024. So going through the joy of raising money for the first time to fund what that would look like.
So what does an immersive theatre?
Yeah, I suppose, the way people consume entertainment is changing. The likes of Cirque du Soleil have been like that staple, and the West End have been that staple. You sit in a theatre, the performances on the stage. This is much more where you go into a world, basically, and you walk through it, and the actors are around you, and you have that freedom to explore that space. You're seeing a lot of them in London now with Peaky Blinders and Great Gatsby and Secret Cinema. Sleep No More is very much in that space, but we found we were creating these enormous worlds for ceremonies and moments, but they were there for a single night for 50 minutes and then got torn down. So we were approached by a group to design one which would be based on all the principles we've learned from large scale ceremonies, but to deliver that in a walkthrough environment. So, and it means we can actually own a stake in something for once, instead of just being there for one moment and gone. We had to get to design something which has a legacy and a return on an annual revenue for us, which would be wonderful. So that I suppose is like a big North Star for us in terms of where we could go on that side of the business. Drones continues to grow. That sits within Sky Magic now. And that's, we open in America early next year. We have an office opening there. We have an office in Singapore.
Whereabouts is your office in the States?
We are going to be in LA.
Cool.
So, but the demand there is huge in itself, but we've never really explored it. We have some great partners in that business already, but for the first time now, again, we're looking to do a funding round to expand quicker. So that is, whereas our New Substance studio is based on reputation and it's much slower. It's been a 20-year build to get to the level we are. In the drones, it's a product-based business, which is very unusual for us as well. People like a drone show. Our creator's really good. They pay this much money, they get a drone show. So, and the global demand is massive, and we were almost the second people in the industry. So we were really, really early in that market before anyone else. So we've flown in the most territories in the world. We have the expansion to America, same into the Middle East. So now it's a matter of we need to raise funding to be able to move quicker into that space and be much bigger as soon as we can.
And how are you going about fundraising?
Yeah, it's a great. It's a whole new world to us. We've been private for 20 years. So now to kind of have very green footsteps into that space, I would say we're very early, and definitely could do with some help and direction into that space in terms of investor portfolio projects and how equity and valuations and who are the right. We got lots of interest. I mean, we've not been short of offers from the very beginning to either exit early or invest in it, but I suppose you've got to find the right mix of investors that take you on the right journey and everything else. So we are tentatively tiptoeing into that space right now.
And do you want to ever exit, or is this something question. You want to do for life?
I think we would if it was the right project or the right people. Sky Magic is much more scalable in terms of multi-territories, multi-fleets, where that could go in terms of, even we've talked about, having a kit under the Christmas tree with 20 drones in it and independent nodes in your lounge and doing your own swarm drone show. It's not many steps away from that. So you could see how that business could very quickly move to an exit in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. And so how did you discover sort of swarm drones? What was the sort of process? Because it was a few years ago.
It was a few years ago. So I think, and I was trying to remember this the other day when we did a keynote for the first time on it. So I think it was about 2014 we saw a video on the internet by Penn State University, and they had a swarm system as part of like a PhD experiment. And I saw it and I thought, that is incredible. That is the future of, and that could be massive if we brought that into entertainment. Hadn't seen anything like it. It was like, like batteries not included meets, short circuit. I was like, this is amazing. So we literally got on a plane, went out to see them. We're like, this is amazing. Can we bring this entertainment? Can we work with you? And it was just like these two worlds not understand. You had like theoretical research, PhD students, no deadlines, no stress, no drama. It was a function of their research, where we were like, let's bring some magic and sparkle to this and take it into entertainment, and we do shows all over the world, and we just couldn't get the two to marry up in terms of the two worlds of research and entertainment. We came back and we're like, there's something definitely in this space. So we started to research it ourselves. We put our own software team on it to look at it, and we were very slow to make any progress. And I remember sitting the development team down and said, right, you got 6 months. We had, I think we put 200 grand into it. I was like, please make this work. And obviously we spent all that money in about a month. We crashed a lot of drones, and we were no further forward. We had made a lot of steps. Again, we switched to outdoor rather than indoor. And we did, but we started to see like where, again, it could go. Outdoor was good. There was interest starting to build. We knew there was a company called Ars Electronica who were funded by Intel, who were circling in the same space as well. We then came across a team in Singapore who were developing at the same time as us. Somebody put us in contact, and they had answers that we didn't have, and we had answers that they didn't have. So very quickly we had a shotgun wedding and brought it all together under one JV, and they're our partners still today. So Hitomi, Bob and Sun, like absolutely geniuses in that space. We then all came together, ended up very quickly doing a show at Mount Fuji. Very random coincidence in terms of, I was like, let's do it in our farm in Yorkshire. Hitomi was like, my uncle owns the campsite at the base of Mount Fuji. I was like, okay, that's better. So we ended up doing a show there. We filmed it over like 10 days. It was, nothing worked properly, and we cobbled it together. So when we edited this film, it looked beautiful, like performers, Mount Fuji, and Mount Fuji is the wettest place on earth, basically. So the worst place to do a drone show. But got this amazing clip together, put it out there almost like as a proof of concept, but in that wonderful way that, the internet doesn't, ask you for permission. It just went bananas. Yeah. So this clip went everywhere, and we were contacted from all over the world with offers of shows and everything, but we didn't have a means to do it. We didn't actually have a system that worked. Like, we had this amazing footage, and we were first, but we had no means to deliver a show. And we were offered millions and millions just to do one show, because we were so early at that point. And it was that awful situation where it's like going, there's all this work on the table, but I knew we couldn't do a show like in a live environment. Fast forward another 6 months, we got to a point where they were getting close, and I just accepted a job in the end. I was like, right, we got offered a decent contract to do a big show in the Middle East in 2016. And I was like, right, we've got 6 months because I've signed a contract. And sometimes I think that's not a bad thing to do with development teams, because if you don't have a North Star, you don't have an end date, there's always more work you can do. And I think we were ready 5 days before the show in terms of the system, and that was 30 drones, which felt like we were landing on the moon at that point. Amazing buzz after it, and then that was in 2016, and then it just went bananas.
And when you say you put it out there for the world, where is the best place for people to follow you to see some of this stuff?
I mean, we just literally put it on our Vimeo channel, and we sent a mail shot out to our database at that point. And because the intention was not to gather we weren't looking for media exposure at that point. We were looking for like a proof of concept and start to share it with our inner circle of clients that we've known from New Substance and other areas for years, just to try and go, we're looking for a project we could work to over a number of years. But it just got sucked out basically from there. But for me, I still think LinkedIn is by far the best platform for us. When we put content out there, it's unbelievable the engagement we get and the positive leads and the meaningful leads we get back from it as well.
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a much underused platform. Actually, like we're doing a lot more with it with the pod and stuff. And as your story typifies, a lot of this stuff does take place in the States first. When I was out there, LinkedIn, it's not quite like email, but it is often the kind of way,
really?
The first way to kind of get to people. Yeah, I was really struck by that when I was in California. What's kind of at the next creative frontier, do you think? Yeah, what's the swarm drones of 5 years ago, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I think drones has a lot further to go. Okay. So, in terms of what we're looking at now, in terms of lasers and the bigger fleets, like when you start to hit 10,000 units and in effect having digital projection screens in the sky, like moving that, out of home conversation on tenfold in terms of being able to animate the sky. It's still the biggest canvas in the world. So, the air and drones, you're seeing what we're seeing now, and people's like, oh yeah, I've seen a drone show before. It's like, well, you've seen a drone show probably with 500,000 units in, but as those units get smaller, more powerful, brighter, can fly closer together, that space gets like very, very interesting very quickly.
How many did you say were involved with the Jubilee?
400 there, and that looked great.
I'm
talking about 10,000.
So 25x that.
It becomes a very different entity. And we've started to see, we've flown in a 2,000 drone space, and very quickly it starts to look like you move out of, it's like computer games, isn't it? Or like resolution. We're in 8-bit territory over here right now, but then you go to HD over here. It's like computer games. It soon becomes a very different platform. If you can start to fly for, we're at the moment
we're kind of in 2-dimensional Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly, yeah. You're in Doom circa 94 at the moment, and it moves very quickly. So yeah, it becomes a very different experience when you start to move into that space.
Yeah, that is that's really exciting when you think about it.
I think if you then look at mixed reality on top of that, so AR overlays in camera as well. So that whole mixed
augmented reality, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Just
those kind of mixed reality worlds. I think when you start to then we're looking at tracking the drones now in camera with AR. So how do we amplify what we're flying in the sky on broadcast as well? So you start to get into world building then, and it starts to get really interesting when you mix the two art forms.
Yeah, I can well imagine. What's the most kind of like inspiring piece of content that you've come across lately to sort of recommend to people? So it could be a book, or it could be a podcast, YouTube video, just something where people can go and get a bit more inspired.
So like it's a really good one. Like all the Fashion Week stuff is really interesting when they had the spray on dress light, just because of what that was, and like that was an interesting moment. Again, caught a huge social traffic, but wasn't groundbreaking. It was the delivery mechanism for it, and brought a lot of interest to that space. I still think Glastonbury is probably one of the best. Glastonbury and Burning Man, I think, continue to outperform everything in terms of arts and creativity, because so much of it is self-curated and self-generated. They have got a platform that it's impossible to recreate. No one can just create one of their moments built over, 20 plus years. And the experimentation there and the breadth of arts and entertainment that you can see in one space is still unbelievable. We worked with festivals all around the world. The only festivals I would still go to as a kind of a paying guest would be Burning Man and Glastonbury, because of the international breadth and diversity that you have there in terms of the thinking and literally the inspiration. You can go there and walk around and be like, oh, right, okay, that's a really good idea. Like we could do something with that. And the people you can meet there in one space is still incredible.
What's Burning Man like? Explain it to somebody that's not been.
Burning Man is it's like a dystopian city, like Mad Max basically is the nearest thing where I think anyone can be whoever they want to be. It's a very hard week in lots of different ways, living out in the desert, in the dust storms and everything else. But the experimentation that's there, it's like nothing else. It doesn't make any sense, but it has like a formalized city environment without it being a city. So you have all those constructs, you have camps, you have tribes, so you have all that kind of infrastructure there. But the concept of Burning Man is that everyone brings their own piece there. So everything is self-curated generally. So everything that is brought there isn't purchased or like staged by the organizers. It's done by the communities that go visit there. So the breadth of design and creativity that you see there is like nothing else.
And what's the most kind of underrated festival perhaps in the UK, or one that's not on people's radars as much? I mean, like you say, we've become much more of a centre for this stuff over the last couple of decades.
I still think it's much more popular now, but I still think Boomtown is a very interesting space. You know, what they were doing, they were so early in terms of that world building piece, again, of not being about the music in terms of what they were doing, but creating a world. I think giving people that escapism to find like their own environment, that city that people have built down there. It's really amazing. You know, so much of it is driven at the festivals by the big names, but the big names are expensive. It drives the ticket price. It drives then all the money is going on staging those artists in that environment. So you very much end up with field, bar, stage, which is great. And absolutely, if that's what you want to go to a festival for, if you want to go to a festival to experience something totally different in an environment that you've never seen before, then things like Boomtown, where they built entire cities, is amazing. And what they're doing now in that immersive space with Wake the Tiger, where it's coming out of their festival now and creating an entire world in itself, which is resonant in terms of what we're trying to do as well. I think that's really interesting because you get to experience something you can't do day to day. And we have so much digital in our life, and people talk about our entire events world went digital for a year, and everyone was like, oh, well, now all festivals will be digital and everything will take place in the metaverse, and you'll have Fortnite concerts and that'll be it. But, you know, I don't wholeheartedly disagree with that, but I largely disagree with that because I think the coming together of people for live entertainment is still, you can't get away from that. It's still one of the best experiences possible. All my best memories are from festivals, concerts, you know, anything in that space where you can get together, have a few beers, live music, live entertainment.
Shared experience.
It's shared experience.
That's brilliant. Patrick, thanks so much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future. We're going to be doing another episode with you soon where we're going to be looking at how you transformed a old oil rig or gas platform, as I've told it must be called.
Yes.
But how you repurpose that and it's a great sustainability project and turn that into a major thing. So can't wait to kind of explore that with you as well.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Jimmy's Jobs. One of the ways we make this show possible is through our various partnerships. If you'd like to partner with us, you'd be joining one of the UK's fastest growing business podcasts, reaching over 40,000 listeners every month. We've helped a wide variety of groups tell their story, from the National Farmers Union right through to the FinTech Alliance. So if you'd like to work with us, just go to www.jobsofthefuture.co. To keep up to date with all Jobs of the Future news, you can follow us across all social media, including our brand new TikTok and YouTube channels.